In the last video, I went over some of the expected and unexpected impacts of the current AI boom on enterprise IT. In this video, I promise to go over some possible solutions. Kind of leading up to the question, how do we survive this current perfect storm of AI costs and challenges? These are three pillars of what I see currently as a way to accomplish uh, the doing more with less and meeting business objectives in the current landscape of AI costs and AI availability. Uh, kind of three tenets: one being clean house, two being reduce, reuse, recycle, and then a third one of thinking outside the box. And what do I mean by cleaning house? It means finally actually doing the dirty work that nobody wants to do, of going through and auditing and remediating all of the workloads that you have in your estate. One of the good things now is that we have all of this AI tooling thrust upon us, is that tools like Glean and Claude and others are actually pretty good at finding um, orphaned resources, finding projects that are no longer in use, figuring out who the original owner and purpose was of things like virtual machines, Kubernetes pods, things of that nature. Anything that was built out of band from your infrastructure as code system. Some of these AI tools can be very useful in figuring out where did all this cruft come from, and which can help you determine what you can kill and what you got to keep. So bring in all your new AI work frenemies in on auditing and even some of the shutdown of some of these resources. Projects that you've known about for a long time but haven't cleaned up just because you didn't want to have to go fight for the executive approval to get them turned off. You didn't want to fight with legal, all those sorts of things. Now is the time to start doing a lot of that house cleaning. Uh, Start actually following the best practices that are laid out by your hypervisor tools, your other third-party tools, and start right-sizing virtual machines, containers, any other composable workloads, to start getting as much of the overhead out of your environment as possible. For your cloud and on-premise assets, start reducing memory in particular, and storage to the smallest size possible. Because when you go to uh, purchase new assets to replace your existing assets, there's going to be some significant sticker shock, particularly for storage and memory. Also, if you are buying new assets, typically we build 20-30% of, or even more, depending on our amortization schedule, of growth into hardware assets. We do similar things when we deploy assets into the cloud. We need to stop uh, doing some of that life cycle growth because of the exorbitant cost right now of things like memory and storage, particularly performance storage. So take that growth out, and then we will deal with it on the back end as it's needed, because there's a good chance these prices will fall in the next 24 months. And if you're buying something on a 36 to 60-month schedule, you don't want to pay a premium because of where the market is right now. And all of these different things are to get you to where you're actually only buying 100% of what you need, whether you're buying it in the cloud or you're buying it on premise in your data center. The next pillar is reduce, reuse, recycle. This is just reevaluating your infrastructure life cycle policy to make sure that you are as efficient as possible. If you're using on-premise compute for 3 years, go to 5. If you're using it for 5, go to 7, 10, 11, 12 years sometimes, depending on the devices. Start looking into extended OEM support for mission critical devices, things like third party support. Um, and even if it's a composable non-critical asset, look at self-sparing and doing your own internal support for things that can are commoditized. Um, this is a really big one. Start looking at your hardware estate as a pool of components. Um, we kind of, as a rule, over the last 10 years, have tried to reduce the number of SKUs and bombs that we have in our environment. And as such, we've kind of standardized on servers that have, a terabyte of memory, at times 2 terabytes of memory as our general purpose servers for things like virtualization and database workloads, notwithstanding, but things like Kubernetes, bare metal workers, cache nodes, all these sorts of things. And there's a lot of times whenever you've deployed on kind of a limited t-shirt size um, type of a policy that you have a lot of different workloads where you have orphaned resources like memory and high performant NVMe storage. We need to start doing is going in and auditing all those environments and start taking out the memory and NVMe from the environments that are underutilizing it, or if we're life cycling those devices and we're still close enough in the server life cycle that we can reuse the DDR5 and those NVMe PCI devices, start right sizing all of the SKUs to the specific environment, and then create a pool of things like memory, SSD, NVMe, high throughput NICs, things like that, and then redistributing those components to where that capacity can be best used. So if you have something like a virtualization farm where you're under 20-30% of memory, potentially you could take half that memory out and get more chassis and CPUs, and then spread that workload out, or potentially as part of a life cycle, just double the, because right now CPU is really kind of a rounding error compared to the cost of memory and NVMe and SSD storage. So because of that GPU gravity that I went over in the last video. So looking at your components as a pool, obviously you have to deal with making sure that your memory banks are properly populated, um, and all those things. But it's definitely an exercise that could save you tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars, depending on the size of your hardware estate. And it's definitely an exercise that's worth going through. Um, this is another thing where if you do have to buy new servers, you need to buy new processing, or you just need a life cycle. You could potentially buy new servers with a lower footprint of the high dollar assets like memory or storage, and backfill with the components that you've pulled out of your existing estate. This is where I'm seeing people making huge savings, versus just completely life cycling their hardware estate. Some pretty large companies that I've seen that are doing a strategy similar to this pretty effectively. Another consideration for this reduce, reuse, recycle kind of looking at your estate is look at remanufactured hardware as an option for particularly for less critical assets. For cattle assets, like redundant worker nodes, cache servers, dev test, things like that. Even look at gray market and used hardware instead of buying high dollar new devices. The gray market has really taken off given the high cost of new hardware, and also the at times the scarcity of certain hardware assets because of the boom in AI. Um, and if you do go to decommission a legacy asset, you finally have something that you decide is just not going to work for you anymore. Get buyback quotes from gray market vendors, because it's amazing what people are using. I've seen people stretching the legs on gear and using things like HP DL360 G9s running Linux, or in their environments. So before you crush anything, if your previous lifecycle policy was to crush legacy IT assets, start getting approval through your risk teams and security teams to look at wiping the drives and doing buyback or sell back to gray market vendors before you actually destroy anything, because there could be a potential of some significant benefit to you um, from those assets still. And since we're on the topic of reducing the amount of server resources you need and reducing the cost of those server resources, it's worthwhile to think about, does every workload even need to be on server class hardware at all? Are there ephemeral workloads that are particularly that are close to the end user that could just run on end user hardware? Could some ephemeral workloads run on workstation class equipment, be it laptops or virtual machines within your laptop environment, or uh, uh, workstation class hardware? And if so, can it run on devices that are already within your laptop and workstation estate? Um, if it could, is it just security tooling? Is it alerting? Is it getting the right OTel on it? What would be preventing you from running some of these workloads on your existing laptop and workstation estate is probably worth doing an exercise to see if that's something that could be of value to you, particularly organizations that have a very large end user compute environment. And if you do have a cloud footprint, if you have hardware that's tied up in processes that run infrequently, batch processes, things of that nature, particularly ones that are really cordoned off to an individual server just because of a security construct or something of that nature, is it something that could be moved to a serverless SaaS offering like Lambda, where it would be comparatively inexpensive to run it in the cloud and it could free up expensive hardware resources? And if you do still need to purchase hardware for these some of these services, could you purchase workstation class assets? Workstation assets obviously have gotten the memory is still more expensive than it had been a few years ago, but it's nothing like the large DDR5 server DIMMs. If you could run some of these workloads on workstation class hardware, even things like Mac Studios or uh, mini PCs and all these types of assets. Um, it could be a significant saving over server class hardware. And on top of that, it could be significantly easier to get a hold of. The supply chain for servers, the closer you get to that GPU and the GPU gravity, the harder it is to get a hold of server assets. So some of these workstation assets might be just the ticket from availability and price. So it's worth doing an exercise and seeing if these are options. So going back and answering the question, how do we survive all this? I really don't know. I mean, I don't know that anybody has all the answers, but I feel like some of these options are going to provide food for thought that maybe you hadn't thought of yet. As you're going through and looking at both this year and next year, there's no end in sight for some of these additional cost and pressure on some of these assets. And hopefully, some of this information can help answer some of the questions and be of value to folks, and hopefully save you some money and allow you to do your job and provide for your business. So hopefully, this was of value to everybody. Thanks a lot, and until next time.